Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm going to say welcome to the 19th Annual Sacramento DA's Office Outstanding Citizens Award. And I'd like us all to stand and join me in a Pledge of Allegiance to start us off. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. For those of you that are first-timers this year, the Outstanding Citizens Award ceremony was started many years ago and goes in conjunction with the annual National Crime Victims' Rights Week, which begins next week. National Crime Victims' Rights Week is a time when we in this country, not just in this community, come together to pay tribute to the victims of crime and those who advocate on their behalf. This morning, we will honor local victims and witnesses who overcame extraordinary, difficult circumstances in their personal lives to testify and to participate in the criminal justice system. We also come together to celebrate those individuals who went above and beyond to protect a victim or to help a victim in need. Behind me, you will see on these displays what we call our memory quilts. They are shown on both screens. They are part of what we call in our office the Homicide Support Network. I ask you to look at the faces on those quilts because those faces represent individuals and families who lost their loved ones to violence and have had impact on their lives that have been forever changed. Before we start, I want to first take a moment and acknowledge some of the folks, elected officials or representatives that have come here today to help us celebrate today. And I will use that word often, which is celebrate. So I'd ask you to hold your applause. So with us today is Joe Debs, my friend, on behalf of Senator Pan, Supervisor Sue Frost, McGregor Scott, my friend and U.S. Attorney here in Sacramento, retired Fire Chief Walt White, thank you for coming. We have many members of different law enforcement agencies here. We have Chief Deputy Phil Brelge from the Sheriff's Department, and we have members from many other departments I see in this room, SAC PD, CHP, Probation, Sheriff's Department. I thank you all, and I'd ask that for a round of applause for those individuals that have come on their behalf. You all good? Oh, okay. Well, I don't know what I'd do without Joni. All right. So this year, before we start the Outstanding Citizens Award, we've added a new award. Many of you have been here before, but this is new. It's called the Beacon of Hope. And I start by saying this. It has been said that we rise by lifting others. This award was created this year to recognize those in our profession who have lifted others, that have helped other people rise, who through their profession and compassion and dedication have enhanced the lives of victims in our community and really across this state and this country. This first ever Beacon of Hope Award this year will go to 2 district attorney victim advocates who work for our office, as I say, in the trenches every day. For those of you that don't know what our victim services do in our office, they are highly trained individuals. They have master's degrees in social work or some related field. They provide critical services at some of the most difficult times of people's lives, whether it be crisis counseling, emotional support, guidance through the criminal justice system, which can be often daunting and very difficult. They provide community referrals, and they also provide assistance in many other facets of helping victims through this very challenging process. The reality is that our victim advocates rarely receive any public recognition that they deserve for their invaluable role that they provide in our system of justice. This past fall, two advocates from our office, Dana Burns and Michelle Husbands, they're probably mortified right now that I'm doing this, demonstrated their level of commitment to their profession and to victims everywhere. We all remember that on October 1st of 2017, the city of Las Vegas was changed forever when a gunman opened fire on people that just wanted to go to a concert. 58 people were killed, 851 people were injured, and there's absolutely no doubt that thousands and thousands of lives were impacted. Soon after that massacre, Dana and Michelle chose to put their personal lives on hold, to answer the call for service, the service of advocates to go to that city to help others in need. They arrived within a few weeks of that massacre. They spent 1 week doing what they do on a daily basis, providing services, helping with things like housing and tenant rights, helping people get things that seem very basic, like replacing a driver's license. They were paired with either one person, a family, a couple, to help those in a time of need. After they came back, they shared much of their experience with many of us. They listened to survivors about what they felt, what they heard, what they smelled, what they thought, or what they saw as the shots rang through the air and finally stopped. They heard about the trauma that people suffered, sleep deprivation, sleep disturbances, not feeling like going outside or being among groups of people. They've heard the prevalence of what they saw as survivor's guilt. What they also remember were the stories of how the local people of Las Vegas came together in the most difficult time they'd ever faced and rallied behind victims. In their own words, these are some of the things that Dana and Michelle relayed to many of us. Quote, people cared for and about each other. People were grateful and kind. People worked really hard. There was hope in the resilience of victims. There was pain, there was laughter, and we were all in this together. And they remember the gratitude that they received, being thanked repeatedly for coming to help their community. The camaraderie among the various staff, knowing that they all had one goal and that they were there to be for service. So this year, I'm sure we're all very proud to award the first ever Beacon of Hope Award to Dana Burns and Michelle Husbands. So can you come on up and we'll celebrate this? He doesn't want to come up. Just so you know, they did not know they were getting this. So.
Well, she's right. I am mortified. I like working undercover. And when I heard of that need, I couldn't not go, is how I felt. And I am so glad I did, and it opened my eyes to further career enjoyment. I really realized that I love working when there's a big crisis. I don't know why, but I do. So I'm grateful, and I'm super grateful for my friend and coordinator, Carrie Martin, who hired me about a long time ago in Yolo County, my first job out of college as a victim advocate, and I didn't even know what a district attorney was, so thank you. I think it was the common thing of soccer that worked. Anyway, and all our colleagues who were doing this same work, just on a smaller venue every single day. We do the same work. It's the same thing. So this is for all you guys, and I just can't even think of anything else to say.
Just wanted to say thank you for all the support that the attorneys do in our office. I'm Michelle Husbands. This is Dana Burns, for those who don't know. And also to all of my coworkers who constantly give us the strength to move forward and do what we do every day. This award is also for them. That sounds like I'm at the Grammys, but this award is also for them.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Yeah, I'm sure you will. Okay, so now we're going to start the Outstanding Citizens Award. So today, the recipients today were nominated by deputy district attorneys, victim advocates, and investigators in our office who felt that the individuals that are being celebrated today showed tremendous courage, made an extraordinary personal sacrifices, and persevered to overcome difficult times, to testify and participate in the criminal justice system, to assist law enforcement, to hold offenders accountable, and to protect to help a victim or a potential victim in need. Not only have these individuals provided great service through their participation in the criminal justice system, but by agreeing to share their stories today, I'm very confident that you're going to walk away today inspired. So with that, I'd like to start off with asking Deputy District Attorney Carolyn Steffens to present our first award.
Good morning. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Carolyn Steffens, and I currently work in the Domestic Violence Unit at the District Attorney's Office. Up here with me is victim advocate Lisa Carell. Oh, hello. She also works as an advocate in the Domestic Violence Unit. And then next to me is William Wickland and Tiffany. The types of cases that we see in the Domestic Violence Unit are unique compared to some of the other cases that come through the District Attorney's Office. And that's because of the type of relationship that exists between the victim and the defendant. And while it's always our primary goal to assist the victims of domestic violence and provide them with as much support as we can, it's also important to recognize that many times it's more than just the victims that are impacted by domestic violence. There are many people who put their own safety at risk and who intervene to try and protect victims of domestic violence. And that's why William is here today. William and Tiffany began a dating relationship in late October of 2015. He was a father of two and lived in a residence in Citrus Heights. Tiffany had recently ended a long-term relationship with her boyfriend, Jay Strobel, and he did not take the breakup well. Even after the breakup, he continued to harass her and threaten her over the phone, in person, and through email. And this continued into November. Now, November 15th of 2015, William and Tiffany went out with friends. They had a great evening, and they returned to William's house just before midnight. They got comfortable, began to relax on the couch in William's living room, and began to watch TV. Now, within 10 minutes of being in the home, William noticed a shadowy reflection lurking near the entryway of his front door. At the time, he had a roommate named Jason, and he just assumed, based on the physical appearance of the individual, the size of the shadow was crawling in on hands and knees. He just assumed that it was his roommate trying to play a practical joke on them. He assumed it so much that he even called out to the figure, acknowledging that he saw the person. However, the person wasn't Jason. After William called out to this individual, Tiffany's ex-boyfriend, Jay Strobel, came out from the entryway holding a gun. He came into the living room, pointed the gun at Tiffany, and told Tiffany that she was going to die tonight. William and Tiffany were shocked. They stood up, and the defendant continued to yell at them that Tiffany was going to die. William intervened. He tried to defuse the situation. He began to talk to the defendant and told him that he could leave. It didn't have to be this way. He put himself in between Tiffany and the defendant, who was still holding the gun. The defendant began to listen initially, and he told William that he could leave. He could leave the house, and it was only Tiffany that had to die. But William didn't. William continued to hold his position in between Tiffany and the defendant. The defendant began to press forward through the house. William continued to hold his position and back up from the living room into his kitchen, holding his position between himself, or between the gun and between Tiffany. There was a moment in the kitchen where the defendant stopped and tried to reach over William to get to Tiffany while holding the gun. It was at that moment that William actually thought that the defendant was going to kill her. And so he tackled the defendant into the kitchen cabinets, knocking them both off balance. They fell to the ground. The defendant got up before William did and hit William across the face with the gun. Blood began to pour into William's eyes. He couldn't see. He was pretty much blinded, but he continued to hold his position. He continued to put his life and safety at risk for Tiffany. They continued to march through the kitchen, back up into the garage and out to the front of the residence. In the front of the residence, Tiffany found a place of cover. She was able to run and hide behind a parked car that was parked right near the front of the garage door. But William stayed. And at this point, the defendant was still holding the gun within inches of William's head, continuing to yell at them, to scream at them. And this entire time, William stayed. He didn't leave. And just as William continued to try and defuse the situation, tell the defendant, as blood was still in his eyes and he was unable to see, that he could just leave, that all he wanted to do was get medical attention and that they had children. The defendant turned towards Tiffany and shot one time at her. The defendant was caught soon after with the gun in his car. William received medical attention and stitches to the injury to his face. And they reported the incident to law enforcement. They testified, both William and Tiffany, courageously at the preliminary hearing and continued to testify at trial. And then William gave a very emotional impact statement at the time of judgment and sentencing. The defendant, Jay Strobel, was convicted with assault with a semi-automatic firearm and personal use of a firearm for both Tiffany and William, and received 22 years and 4 months in state prison. William is being recognized today because he could have left at any time. He was given the option to leave his house, to leave Tiffany there. He could have moved out of the way and not held his position between Tiffany and the defendant. He didn't have to tackle the defendant into a cabinet, saving Tiffany's life. And he could have run for cover out in front of the house, but he didn't. And it's for this reason that William is being recognized today. Anne Marie, I'd like to present to you William Wicklund for this year's Outstanding Citizen Award.
Not really. Not sure what to say. I appreciate the recognition. I just want to give thanks to my mom for helping me believe in the truth and stand up for my family and friends and protect my home.
This time I'd invite up Deputy District Attorney Kimberly Macy to do our next presentation.
Good morning. My name is Kimberly Macy, and I work in our vertical vehicular homicide unit. And with me today is Sharon McIntyre. On April 7th of 2016, the lives of dozens of strangers collided with one another. And fortunately, Sharon McIntyre was right in the middle of it. It was the middle of a regular Thursday afternoon in Sacramento. The defendant, high on meth from a night-long binge that started in Reno, was driving an F-250 he'd stolen from his mom in Reno. For some reason, when he got to Sacramento at about 1 o'clock p.m., He stopped on the center median of westbound I-80 between Madison and Greenback. CHP motor officer Michael Erickson was on duty and went to do a welfare check on the truck. When he pulled his motorcycle in behind the truck, the defendant then suddenly put the truck in reverse. He slammed into the motorcycle and ejected Officer Erickson. Then he drove forward around the overturned motorcycle and ran over Officer Erickson as he fled the scene. He fled west on 80, eventually reaching a construction zone near Northgate Boulevard. By now, his tire was flat, and he abandoned the truck. He jumped into a running pickup truck that was at that site and drove away. With CHP officers from multiple stations, as well as officers from the Solano Sheriff's Department chasing him, the pursuit finally ended in Fairfield with the use of a spike strip, and he was arrested. So many people did the right thing that day. There were numerous civilians driving on the freeway that afternoon who saw Officer Erickson get hit, and they then called 911 and stopped to try to help him. 2 civilians followed the defendant from that scene to the start of the construction zone, taking pictures with their cell phones as they followed him. And multiple officers, whom I want to acknowledge today, from the ground in their cars, from the air in helicopters, responded to assist Officer Erickson, apprehend the defendant, interview witnesses, investigate the various crime scenes, and reconstruct the collision between Officer Erickson and the truck. But Sharon McIntyre stood out to me in particular. She's a 14-year veteran firefighter paramedic for the Sacramento Fire Department with another 10 years experience with another agency. But she was not on duty that day. She was not responding to a call for service. She just happened to be on the freeway that day. She did not see Officer Erickson get hit. Instead, she came upon the scene just seconds after it happened. She saw brake lights in front of her and the traffic coming to a halt. So she stopped her car on the freeway and got out to see if anyone needed help. She tried to figure out what had happened, how many people might be in danger, whether people were at risk on the other side of the freeway. Then she saw the motorcycle that was on its side in the center median. 2 civilians were frantically trying to use the radio on the motorcycle, but they couldn't figure out how to use it. Sharon saw Officer Erickson lying on the ground with people around him trying to help. She got on a portable radio that someone was holding and gave CHP dispatch her location and told them that there was an officer down. She stabilized Officer Erickson's C-spine and cleared his airway, which was obstructed by blood. Once she could see that his breathing was stabilized, she assessed his other injuries. She could see that he was in critical condition and knew that he had about 30 minutes to live if he didn't get medical attention. Other officers had started to arrive on scene. Officer Erickson was in such bad shape that one of the officers that arrived described him as, quote, his eyes were open, but he was not present. That officer testified that he knew death was imminent. Sharon placed a C-collar on Officer Erickson that she was able to get from one of the police officers that had arrived. And they all waited for an ambulance, but as they waited for an ambulance, Sharon heard a helicopter overhead. Based on her experience, she knew it was CHP H-20 and requested that it land on the freeway because she knew there were paramedics on board and they could get Officer Erickson to a hospital more quickly. The helicopter landed on the freeway, and once they moved Officer Erickson into the helicopter, she got on board with them because she knew the information that she had from being first on scene was worth more than her car, which she left in the middle of the freeway. They flew to UC Davis Medical Center, landed on the roof, and got Officer Erickson to the emergency room. Sharon told the ER staff about his injuries, and they went to work on him. Officer Erickson was in the hospital for about 2 months and had to learn to walk again. But he is alive, and he is walking again. One thing that struck me throughout my interactions with Sharon was her professionalism. When we spoke, she often referred to me as ma'am, and her recitation at trial of her involvement illustrated her professionalism, quick thinking, and her immediate reaction to step forward and do the right thing. She saved Officer Erickson's life. Anne Marie, I present to you Sharon McIntyre for this year's Outstanding Citizens Award.
What an incredible honor it is to be here today among some remarkable people in this audience who have stepped forward and presented some of the greatest examples of human kindness. I want to say thank you to the District Attorney's Office for helping bring justice to those who need it, and at the same time for being here to recognize and support those who have put their best efforts forward to show compassion and kindness to their fellow human beings. I want to thank my family for being supportive and for always being my strength, my stronghold. I want to thank my my department for giving me the training and the opportunity to serve my community. And I want to thank God for His divine intervention that guided my actions that day. Thank you.
Told you it's pretty inspiring. At this time, I'd introduce Deputy District Attorney Matt Chisholm for our next recipient.
Pretty tough to follow those. But we're going to do it. This story starts in almost a different world. It was a time when your coffee choices were calf and decaf. It was a time when you started your car, you heard the engine, and if it was loud, it was cool. And you never, on a cell phone, got this symbol because there was no cell phone. And when you saw this symbol, it was John Rambo needing a ride into town on the side of the road. It was a different world. And this case started in May 20th, 1997. Tessa lived a living hell that night. She was 14. She was finishing her freshman year of high school. She lived with her mother and her sister. Her sister was 11 at a home here in the Sacramento area. She woke up in the middle of the night to someone peering into her bedroom. And she thought it was a family member checking on her. She got up to investigate and opened the door to her bedroom and came face to face with a man with a gun who was in a ski mask. She screamed, waking her sister and her mother, who came out to the landing there on the stairs. He was well prepared. He had a full duffel bag of tape and rope. He taped, after threatening them, taped Tessa's mother and Tessa's sister, hog-tied them on the landing there of the stairs, taped them together. He also taped Tessa up, took her to her bedroom, and repeatedly sexually assaulted her over the next hour. Her mother and her sister had to listen to it, approximately 10 feet away. After this sexual assault, he smoked a cigarette and basked almost in the glory of what he had done. After that, he rummaged through the house, took the valuables, and when the house became quiet, Tessa gathered the strength to stand up, search the house for shears, and cut her family loose and herself loose. And her ordeal didn't end then. She was interviewed by law enforcement. When law enforcement arrived, her mother still had the tape wrapped around her head. She was interviewed. The house was processed for evidence. They interviewed the neighbors. They interviewed friends. Any lead. Tessa had suspicions. Although the assailant was masked, he had piercing blue eyes. And other factors led her to believe that it was a former boyfriend named Jason Cox. They had an innocent school-age relationship. They maybe dated for a month, but he developed some grudge against her, and he really stuck out in her head as the primary suspect. Tessa went through an evidentiary exam at the hospital, and they recovered DNA after those swabs were tested. However, they were not suitable to upload to DNA databases. It only narrowed it to 1 in 200 in the Caucasian population. Her friends were interviewed, so-called friends. Many of them had wild and eccentric stories to explain what happened. One of her so-called friends stated that she knew who the perpetrator was and that he belonged to a white supremacist church in Clear Lake, and so on and so forth. We investigated it. It was all bunk. Other leads blamed Tessa for actually conspiring with the assailant because she wanted to miss a family vacation. No evidence to support it. By the end of 1997, the case had gone cold. In 2007, Brad Jones entered the picture. He was a detective by that time in the sex assault unit. Back in 1997, he was actually a patrol officer who worked on the perimeter of this call, and it always struck him and stayed with him. He had cold case duties, and he specifically sought out this case and wanted to solve this case before he retired. He re-interviewed all the victims, Tessa, her family. He also re-interviewed all of the witnesses and associates in this case. He methodically went over all of the evidence that was booked into evidence that night. And one of the items was a cigarette butt that was found in her bedroom. Detective Jones knew that DNA technology had progressed in the last 10 years and gotten better, more precise, more reliable. He submitted numerous items, not just the cigarette butt, but many other items for testing to the Sacramento County Crime Lab. And in 2014, we got a 1 in 8 billion hit on the cigarette butt. It was a big break in the case. That time we applied for a search warrant. The only suspect in Tessa's mind was still Jason Cox. Search warrant allowed us to get a DNA sample from Mr. Cox and test it against the cigarette butt, and it was a match. And the case didn't stop there. For the next 2 years, it pended for trial with numerous legal hurdles to overcome. But Tessa never gave in. The CSI officer who collected the cigarette butt died before the case could make it to trial, creating even more legal hurdles. But Tessa did not give in. Finally, in March 15th of 2017, while we were in the trial court, the defendant finally gave in. He knew that Tessa wasn't going to quit. He knew that she was going to pursue justice no matter how long it took. He pled to 5 sexual assault felonies and was sentenced to 20 years and had to waive the 2 years that he sat in from 2014 to 2017. So that strength, that perseverance, despite your friends giving up on you and lying about you, despite horrible actions being taken against you and your family, and looking over your shoulder for 19 years. That uncommon strength and perseverance is something that we recognize today, and I present Tessa to you, Anne Marie.
Sorry, I'm super nervous. So 14-year-old Tessa sure knew how to pick boyfriends and friends, right? I want to thank Derek Greenwood because there were several detectives, but he was one that was there in the beginning and in the end too. I want to thank Weave because they were there for me and held my hand, gave me a stuffed animal. Her name was Luba. And one day I will give back and I will do the same. I have to thank Brad Jones because he called me one day out of the blue and asked me if I ever smoked cigarettes with Jason Cox in my bedroom, and I knew 100% that I never did that, and I just knew that they had him, and he asked me if I would testify, and it was never a question in my mind whether I'd testify or not. First of all, I wanted justice. Second of all, I couldn't live with myself if I thought he had done it to someone else. And so I waited, and then I met Karina Orozco, and she helped as well. But the worst part was not knowing exactly who it was, and for 17 and a half years, everywhere I went, any time I saw someone that looked like him, I would think, my stomach would drop, and I'd think, is that him? And it took a year after his arrest that I still thought, every time I saw someone, I thought it would be him, and I'd have to remind myself, no, he's in jail, it can't be that random stranger at this grocery store or whatever. I also want to thank, of course, Dana Burns. You've already heard how awesome she is. She has been with me the entire time and has, I don't want to say like dumb things down for me because I do not know laws very well. That's not been my study, but I've just been really patient and just been there and hold my hand the entire time. And then, of course, Matt Chisholm, who has been incredibly kind and sympathetic and just, I don't know how to thank him enough. And also at the very end when I didn't know, I was given some just choices to make, I asked him, if I were your daughter, what would you do? And he gave me, I believe, his honest opinion and advice, and I'm really grateful for everything everyone has done for me. Thank you.
All right, next up, I'd like to invite up Assistant Chief Deputy Robin Shakely for the next award.
Sharon Brandau was a 69-year-old homeless woman who stayed under the underpass near the Salvation Army on Broadway. On August 1st at about 5 p.m., Jose Ramirez was driving by and saw her. Having himself suffered from homelessness, he recognized exactly what her plight was, as she had several plastic bags and a rolling suitcase that she would slowly move from one place to the other, then go back and get it. Most of us on a hot August evening passed by, but Jose Ramirez did not. He wanted to stop and see if there was anything that he could do for her. So he stopped, and he asked her if there was anything he could do for her, and he asked her for her name. Something a lot of us don't think to do, to ask for the name of a homeless person. She told him her name was Sharon, and he tries to have these memory games that he plays with himself so he can remember names. So he said, "Oh, you mean like Sharon Stone?" And the victim replied, "Not her, she's nasty." So, trying to recover from his verbal faux pas, he asked her if she was hungry, and she was. And so we went to the Carl's Jr. and bought her a burger and fries and a Coke, brought it back to her and presented her with the food, and she informed him that she didn't like French fries. She did take the drink, however. He didn't want to just leave her like that, though, so he gave her some money, and she told him not to worry that she was going to be paid the next day. As it turned out, she was expecting her Social Security check. But he couldn't bear the thought of leaving her there. He was at a point where he didn't have a place that he was really living himself where he could have guests. So he told her he'd be back the next morning to check on her and to take her to some homeless shelters because he did not want the 69-year-old woman to spend another night like that, homeless. So he did, good to his word, came back first thing the next morning. When he left her, she had laid out her little red blanket on the side of the sidewalk, and she had little rocks that she'd carefully placed with all of her belongings so that her blanket wouldn't blow away. And he didn't like the spot that she'd chosen for herself because he thought it was too exposed, and there was an area up under the overpass, and he said, "How about if I take you up there?" And she said, "Nope, if you take me up there, I'll never be able to get down on my own." Well, that's where he saw her, face down, naked from the waist down, and dead. So he called 911, and he also called the media because he thought this is just not right. People need to look at what happens to the homeless in our society. He came and he waited for the police department. He gave a statement on scene. They asked him to come back to the police department and give a recorded statement with the detectives, and they asked him to provide his DNA and his fingernail scrapings. And I don't know if he knows this to this day, but the first person who finds the body and the last person that sees them alive is often the first suspect. And so he was initially a suspect because there were no others. But on September 16th, Sergeant Farnsworth was doing his work in downtown Sacramento, and he was flagged down by a woman who had a man named Benjamin Brownlee in his car. And she said, "I have a guy with me that has something he wants to confess to you." Now, Sergeant Farnsworth said a lot of times people will bring their kids and want them to confess that they stole a bicycle, so they have the shame of telling a police officer. But he looked, and it was a full-grown man. And he said, "So what did you want to tell me, partner?" And he said, "I strangled a lady under the bridge about 6 weeks ago." He was taken back. Detective Eddie McCauley from the Sacramento Police Department was called in, and he gave a taped interview in which he confessed to strangling the life out of Sharon Brandau. As it turns out, he was from New York. He had just gotten out of prison where he had spent 10 years for a very similar assault that was caught on video of a woman who survived. Miss Brandau suffered a horrible death. She had broken jawbones on both sides, a broken neck. She had multiple sexual penetrating injuries, and the cause of death was eventually asphyxiation. Now, Mr. Ramirez came to the first appearance. When there was an arrest, he came for the arraignment. And he wears this signature hat every time. He wanted to meet her family, but we didn't know who her family was at that time. And so he was determined that she not be forgotten and that there be somebody in court for each and every court appearance to remind all of us that she was a person that deserved to be remembered and deserved to be represented. So for every court appearance for a year, Mr. Ramirez was there, comforting me to know that, yep, somebody's here that cares, besides us that are paid to care. We went to the whole trial, and Mr. Ramirez was not allowed to be in the trial because he was a witness, but he was there every day. And then we got a lot of publicity on the case, and in the Sacramento Bee, and Sharon's family read that not only had she been murdered, but her case was now in trial. Kathy Byers is her daughter. And she called the court on Friday, the Friday before closing arguments, to say, "This was my mother. What can I do? I want to be there." And so Tatiana Morphus, our victim advocate, worked with the family. They were all able to come, and we told them about Jose Ramirez, who had been there in their absence each and every day. And they were introduced to Jose Ramirez. Mr. Brownlee was convicted of her murder, and at the victim impact statement, Mrs. Byers gave this statement, and I know that Mr. Ramirez would like you to know a little bit about Sharon Brandau. Ms. Byers said, "Sharon Brandau never had any hesitation in speaking her mind. When she had an opinion, she very strongly expressed it. And Mr. Ramirez recognized that from his reaction to Sharon Stone. Mrs. Byers continued in her victim impact statement as she spoke to the court and the man who murdered her. Sharon is now a mute. Her voice was taken away. It was choked out of her in a matter of minutes, so that she herself cannot now tell you how she might feel about all of this. Sharon wasn't just some nameless person that meant nothing to anyone. She was the oldest of 5 children, born into a poor family, yet she always showed great personal strength. As a child, I remember only twice us ever being on welfare. Both of those times my mom couldn't find work. But as soon as she got a job, we got off welfare. See, not just when I was a kid, but her whole life, even as an older adult, and she was 69. She did not suck the system dry. Sharon worked all her life until she physically couldn't anymore. She lived very simply, being homeless much of the time, and learned to live and be happy with little. She lived alone by choice. She lived off of her Social Security, which she was very proud to say she'd earned every penny. She took great self-respect in working for and earning what she got. Over the years, she did at times accept help from others, but only in those moments of desperate need, and not very often did she rely on people. She had one last evening of desperate need. She was strong and fearless. She was fiercely independent. She was valued and very much loved. She was and will continue to be thought of often at family gatherings, and she will be missed. And now at those family gatherings, I know that the family remembers not only their mother, but also the man who showed their mother a final kindness and could be there when they didn't even know they were needed. And I'm sure that Mr. Ramirez would agree with Sharon McIntyre when she thanked God whose divine intervention inspired her that day, because Mr. Ramirez had a shirt on much like he does now with the cross, and he that day lived out his faith. So, Anne Marie, I'd like to represent to you Jose Ramirez.
Don't go away. He hates attention. He's a private guy. The shirt he had on that day said, "I serve the king." He lives his life in servant. We all have people in our lives, family members, friends that need help, they're homeless. Many times it's by choice, they live that life. Sometimes they can't help their condition, their circumstances. But that doesn't take away the fact that as a society, they're human beings. And you and I and everyone should be mutually respected as a human being and not judged by the fact that they're in that condition or they're in that circumstance, because you don't know what brought them there. And we need more people. We need more people to just stand up. All of us need to stand up for each other as a person, as a human being, and do the right thing and respect each other. And hey, Jose's family now. And I'm grateful he was there in her last time, and I'm glad her hard life is over. And but his being there was a great comfort to us as a family. So
I'll see her again. The Lord promises that. I'll see her again.
thank you for the recognition.
Next up, I'd ask Deputy District Attorney Allison Dunham to come up and do our last presentation on outstanding citizens.
Good morning. My name is Allison Dunham, and I'm a prosecutor at the Sacramento County District Attorney's Office. I'm assigned to the high-risk domestic violence unit, and the high-risk domestic violence unit is grant-funded by the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services and the Violence Against Women's Act. The high-risk domestic violence unit was created with the intent to prosecute Sacramento County's most serious crimes of domestic violence. The unit consists of myself as the prosecutor. I also have a victim advocate assigned to me, Lisa Corral, and an investigator, Tom Little. Today, I am honored to introduce to you two extraordinary women, Barbara Roberts and her daughter, Tanya Rufus. We are here to recognize Tanya Rufus not only for her incredible courage, but also because on December the 15th of 2015, Tanya Rufus saved her mother's life. On that day, Tanya was in her room with her developmentally disabled sister, Kimberly, who is also here today, when she heard her mother yell for help. Tanya left her bedroom and found her stepfather standing over her mother in the living room. He had a knife in his hand, and he was stabbing her mother all over her body. At first, Tanya yelled at Michael Roberts to stop. He did not stop. Then Tanya grabbed a baseball bat. Michael Roberts stood up and looked at Tanya. He still had the knife in his hand. Tanya swung the bat, but Michael Roberts caught the bat mid-swing. Michael Roberts then took Barbara's purse, dumped it out, took her car keys. He then walked back in the direction of Barbara, where she was laying on the floor in a pool of her own blood. Tanya, unarmed, blocked Michael Roberts' path with her own body. She stood chest to chest with Michael Roberts, who was 6'1", 245 pounds, preventing him from further attacking her mother. Michael Roberts turned around and left the house in Barbara's car. Tanya then called 911. She placed towels on her mother's wounds to stop the bleeding and waited for the paramedics to arrive. Barbara told Tanya she was dead. Tanya reassured Barbara she was not dead because she was speaking to her. Law enforcement and paramedics arrived shortly thereafter. That day, Barbara suffered 10 stab wounds to her body and several defensive wounds to her hands. Unfortunately, this is not the first time that Michael Roberts had been violent with Barbara in their 30-year marriage, but I'm happy to report it was the last time. Michael Roberts pleaded no contest to attempt murder, and on March the 2nd of 2018, he was sentenced to 25 years to life under the 3 strikes law. Anne Marie, I present to you Tanya Rufus for this year's Outstanding Citizen Award.
I'm just glad my mom's here today. I don't feel like a hero. I was there saving my mom. I didn't think about myself. I'm happy she hasn't. She doesn't have to be in that place no more with him, and he got what he deserved. Yes. I want to thank Lisa Corral, and I want to thank Allison Duran for helping my mom through this.
Yes.
And I appreciate the award and thank God that my mom's here with us, my family, my cousin, my fiance, my brother and my sister, my mom's fiance, and the city of Sacramento. Thank you.
I don't think anybody can doubt why they're all being recognized today. The last award that we present today is a new award we started a few years ago called the Outstanding Commendation Award. This year, it goes to somebody that's a determined and resilient crime victim survivor who's gone on to dedicate herself to the cause of helping others. In 2015, 13-year-old Shaylin Christian survived an attempted murder and suffered extensive injuries, all at the hands of her own father. As a crime victim, she never had what some people refer to as victim mentality. Quite the opposite. Her strong faith allowed her to thrive and to give back to her community. Shaylin believes that the near tragedy that she experienced happened to her for a reason, so that she would have a better understanding of what others might be going through in their own lives. She now spends her time as a 13-year-old as an ambassador, sharing her story at schools, at church, with anyone that she meets that she knows that might need encouragement to help overcome obstacles in their time of need. She also helps them understand what it's like to be a survivor of abuse and how she found strength through her own experience. Shaylin is planning to travel to Eastern Europe to work with children who have been abandoned and abused by their own parents. She's excited about sharing her story with them, as she can identify with them being abused by someone who was supposed to love and protect her. Please join me in honoring Shaylin Christian for spreading her message of hope and her public service as a youth advocate and leader. Shaylin Christian.
Hi, I'm super nervous. Okay, I want to start off by thanking all my family, who I know I couldn't have gone through this without. They've supported me through everything. I know that it was God that saved me that day and that timed everything perfectly. And I know the officers, they were there for me, and I love them so much. Thank you guys so much. Sorry, I'm shaking. Okay. I'm sorry. I was calmed by the Lord, and I remember thinking that I was going to die, but I wasn't scared because I thought I was going to heaven. And I did all that through him, and because of him, I'm still alive. Thank you.
If I could just have all the recipients come up here so we can close this out appropriately, including Michelle and Dana. Before we take a group photo, I want to just kind of end this with a story about a movie that I saw recently. And if any of you haven't seen it, I would really recommend you see it. It's the movie called Wonder. I'm going to look at Rochelle Ditmore and ask her if she's seen it. It's based on a true story, a bestseller in the New York Times. It's about an incredibly inspiring and heartwarming story of a 5th grade student by the name of Augie Pullman, who overcame extraordinary challenges by going back into mainstream elementary school. And if you watch the movie or you read the book, there's things in there that I think we can take away from today and what we're doing today to recognize individuals. So there's quotes in that book or in that movie that you may remember or may have heard. Kinder than necessary, because it's not enough to be kind. One should be kinder than needed. Courage, kindness, friendship. These are the qualities that define us as human beings and propel us on occasion to greatness. The things we do outlast our mortality. The things we do are like monuments that people build to honor heroes after they've died. They're like the pyramids that the Egyptians built to honor the pharaohs. Only instead of being made of stone, they're made out of the memories people have of you. For those that we've honored today, I'm quite confident that what you've done will outlast your mortality. And lastly, the best line in the whole movie was when Augie said, "I think there should be a rule that everyone in the world should get a standing ovation at least once in their lives." And I'd ask that we do that now. Thank you all for coming. This is a good day, as I say, for the people. So celebrate it. It's a time for celebration, and we have stuff outside. So thank you, and we look forward to seeing you all next year.